were not interested in fighting anyone. But when confronted with a choice of going silently or putting up resistance, we tried the silent option. It didn't work out well for us. So we, from 1991 on, have tried to invest in our own defense. We were spending more than 2% of our GDP on defense before that became the NATO known benchmark, and now are spending more than 5% of our GDP on defense, not because of requirements by others, but because of a deeply held belief here that no matter what, we will have to put up a fight.
Welcome to So What's the Strategy? I'm your host, Matthew Kroenig. Today's episode will focus on the national security strategy of Estonia. As a small country bordering Russia, Estonia may be in the most dangerous national security position on Earth. Many scenarios for wars between NATO and Russia start with a hypothetical Russian invasion of Estonia. So how do Estonia's leaders think about protecting themselves in this dangerous environment? To discuss this topic, we're fortunate to be joined today by Jonatan Vseviov. He is Secretary General of the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, essentially the number 2 official in Estonia's MFA. He also served as Permanent Secretary of Estonia's Ministry of Defense, and he's a former Estonian ambassador to the United States. As such, Secretary General Vseviov is uniquely positioned to discuss Estonia's national security strategy. Former National Security Advisor General Brent Scowcroft used to challenge his team with a simple question. So what's the strategy? What do you want to do? And how are you going to do it? That's the focus of this show. On So What's the Strategy, we talk with senior government officials and leading experts about the strategies for addressing the most important security challenges facing the United States and the world. Let's get started. Secretary General Vseviov, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So if we could, let's start with Estonia's strategic context. I started in the introduction by saying Estonia may be in the world's most dangerous security environment. Is that how you see it? Describe Estonia's security environment for us.
Well, it's currently totally under our control. It's always a challenge, I guess, when you live next to a neighbor that's more than 100 times bigger than you are and doesn't always necessarily want to get along with you. But we've lived here on the eastern shore of the Baltic Sea for more than 5,000 years, for longer certainly than there has been a Russia next to us, and forever had to deal with the challenges, usually by bigger players than we are. So for us, this is nothing out of the ordinary. It's like I would say the Japanese handle the seismic environment they live in. So what do? Do they get paralyzed by fear? They don't. They prepare. They ensure that their buildings are such that can withstand the frequent earthquakes. And that's how we handle the security situation. We prepare. And that's why we spend more than 5% of our GDP on proper defense. That's why we have mandatory conscription, a reserve army-based system, which helps us, notwithstanding the small population of the country, helps us nevertheless to field an army and a military that we believe is sufficient, together with our allies' contributions, to deter any military aggression against our independence.
Part of the reason I wanted to have you today is because I've had you guest lecture to my students at Georgetown before, and it was very compelling. And one thing I remember that stood out is you talked about how Estonia's history, especially at the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War, or really throughout the Cold War, shaped your current strategy. Could you talk about that? How did your history shape your current strategy?
Now, you're giving me an impossible task of squeezing 5,000 years into 2 minutes, but I'll do my best, and I won't bore your listeners with 5,000 or even the last 700 years. I'll start with 1939, when on August 23rd, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union became allies, signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and divided up Eastern Europe between the two of them. Now, on September 1st, 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland. Soon, the Soviets invaded Poland from the east. And a country 30 times our size, Poland, was dismantled, destroyed, wiped off the map in a few weeks' time. And then, in that context, we were presented with an ultimatum by the Soviets to allow Soviet military to build military bases on Estonia's territory. As is always the case, this ultimatum came with threats, but also promises never to interfere in our domestic affairs. Now, we know today that our leaders understood what they were facing. They understood that Stalin was not really keen on respecting our sovereignty, but they decided to attempt to hide from history. They signed the deal, and in less than a year, the country was destroyed. We ended up fighting the war anyways. We ended up fighting the war in foreign uniforms. And soon, when the Nazis invaded, continued their crimes in our territory, ended up losing half a century. So when we regained our independence in 1991, there were two lessons that I believe we took away from those days. First, not fighting is not the safer option. Now, this is not an aggressive statement. We're a very small country, a country of 1.3 million. So we're not interested in fighting anyone. But when confronted with a choice of going silently or putting up resistance, we tried the silent option. It didn't work out well for us. So we, from 1991 on, have tried to invest in our own defense. We were spending more than 2% of our GDP on defense before that became the NATO known benchmark, and now are spending more than 5% of our GDP on defense, not because of requirements by others, but because of a deeply held belief here that no matter what, we will have to put up a fight. Second lesson from those days was that we should never be alone again. 1939, August, September, October, we looked around us. We saw two totalitarian regimes that had become allies. We saw Western democracies that were unable to help us. We saw the United States that was self-isolating on the other side of the ocean. We basically found ourselves to be alone. So from 1991 on, our policy has been that of integration. We joined NATO and the European Union, the OSCE, the OECD, the Schengen area of free movement, the Eurozone, you name it, we're a part of it. Not because of narrow interests tied to each of these organizations, but because of a wider understanding that for a small country like ours, we need to ensure that we are as tied to the international system, and to be more precise, as strongly tied to Europe as possible. By 2012, we had achieved that. We had joined everything there is to join. And now the challenge has been to make those organizations stronger, ensure that this framework, this modern Europe or modern West, as we know it, made up of institutions, norms, regulations, organizations, that this West survives the turbulence of the 21st century. For us, these are existential issues. So the two lessons: not fighting, not the safer option, and never alone again.
Very helpful, thank you. And sticking with history for a moment, but coming to more recent history, how did Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and then its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 change the way Estonia thinks about its strategy, if at all?
In some ways, it hasn't changed the strategy, because unlike many others, we were never blind to the dangers emanating from the East. And the reason why we were never blind has nothing to do with our heightened sophistication or better understanding of Russia necessarily. It's just that we watch Russia. That's the only country that we really pay attention to in terms of our intelligence gathering, in terms of our think tanks focus, in terms of what our foreign ministry is focusing on. Now, Putin has been in power in Russia for more than a quarter century, and during that time he has spoken and written at length about how he sees Russia, Russia's relationship with Europe, how he defines Russia's place in the world. And we have now more than 25 years of actual data from his actual foreign policy to compare his speeches to. And frankly, Matt, I'll be blunt. He's one of the most transparent world leaders out there. He has been openly saying what it is that he wants to achieve. He's called the collapse of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. So essentially what we're seeing in Ukraine today is intimately linked to his Europe policy, the goals of which have been clear for decades. It is the destruction of Ukraine as a separate independent entity, the absorption of Ukraine into the so-called Russian world, perhaps nominally independent, or at least part of it nominally independent on the map of the world, but de facto under Moscow control. And then the carving out of a buffer zone on his western borders by pushing back NATO military activity to pre-1997 borders, and ensuring that countries like mine would be condemned to at least limited sovereignty. So that's what he's pursued. Now, the difference between 2022 and 2014, I think the most significant difference is not in the scale of the military operation, even though that too. In 2022, Russia no longer bothered to wear masks. It allowed masks to fall. Back in 2014, you remember, it was supposed to be the little green men that went in and annexed Crimea, and local insurgents that were supposed to be the ones fighting Ukraine in the east of the country. In 2022, they no longer bothered. So all masks fell. Outright aggression with the goal of militarily taking over a sovereign country, with their plan A being a blitzkrieg type of a rapid operation, after which the body politic of Ukraine was supposed to collapse, and after which they were supposed to negotiate from a position of strength a new European security order. Now that obviously failed. That plan didn't work out. We're now in this war for more than 4 years, is on his plan B, which is a typical war of attrition-like situation where he expects the other side to tie up first. And by the way, the other side for Putin is not Ukraine. He has at length explained how he does not view Ukraine as a separate entity, either as a state nor as a nation. The other side is the West, the United States, the democracies of Europe. And this is where contemporary Putinist thinking is very similar to old Soviet thinking, where they recognize that the West may be stronger than Russia is economically and militarily, but not mentally. Because of our system of governance, because of the fact that we change government from time to time because of elections, they don't expect us to be able to have staying power. And so today, Putin's theory of victory rests on this assumption that the United States and the democracies of Europe will be unable to stay focused, tire, thus change direction, after which he would be able to get what he's after in Ukraine, and that's not part of Ukraine, but all of it, and then move on to negotiate, preferably, a more preferable security arrangement in Europe. For us, this is existential. If we allow territorial integrity and sovereignty to become empty phrases in outdated treaties and not de facto guiding principles of European security, then as a border country, as a neighboring country of Russia's, our core interests would be undermined. And if we think that we can buy ourselves stability by feeding the aggressor the freedom of others, then we surely have not learned the lessons of European history.
Very compelling explanation of Putin's goals and strategy. Thanks, Jonathan. What about Estonia's goals? As you know, an important part of strategy is having clear goals. You talked about deterrence earlier. But is that the goal? How would you describe success from Estonia's point of view?
So one of our frustrations since 2022 has been that the democracies of the West have had a hard time defining what it is that we want. Well, we've tried to do our part. We've tried to be very open and transparent about what it is that we want as Estonia. Our goals vis-a-vis Russia, Ukraine, are very limited. We want to convince Moscow to reassess its strategy vis-a-vis Ukraine and vis-a-vis Europe, and pull itself back to within its internationally recognized borders. Now, some might say that even this very limited goal is too ambitious, and then my reply would be to challenge them to give me a better definition of our goals. If we consider territorial integrity and internationally recognized borders as a goal too aspirational, then what are we really talking about? Helping Ukraine is not a charity project. Ukraine's central geopolitical importance has been explained at length by European and American writers alike. Zbigniew Brzezinski, famously, in his The Grand Chessboard, talked about the central importance of Ukraine. Ukraine will be rebuilt, as all countries, all cities with potential have been in the past. Ukraine will be part of someone's security framework, and Ukraine will be part of someone's economic framework. It will either be part of the European security arrangement, aligned with us, governed by the same principles that we are governed by, part of our economic zone, or it will fall to the other side. Vacuums and gray areas do not hold, certainly not in geopolitically central areas. So what we're really striving for in Ukraine is not just defensive in the sense of us attempting to uphold an international order based on territorial integrity, sovereignty, and the basic principles of the UN Charter. We're also attempting to deny Russia a chance of rebuilding, reclaiming an empire that would dominate over Central and Eastern Europe. Now that, if we succeed, will not end history. Nothing will end history. But the best antidote to the successful resurgence of Russian imperialism in Central and Eastern Europe is a European, democratic, secure Ukraine. I like to draw parallels to the situation that the United States and Western European democracies faced in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, where had there been no Marshall Plan, no NATO, no US political support for European integration, the democracies of Western Europe would have collapsed. And they would not have collapsed into the abyss. They would have collapsed to the other side. Now, the Marshall Plan, NATO, everything else that the United States did, the strategy that the United States crafted and then implemented, required enormous investment from the United States. But eventually, that investment allowed the second half of the 20th century to be the American century. The success of the United States depended upon the success of this strategy. The Ukraine situation is going to be somewhat similar. If we succeed, then we will buy ourselves a generation's worth of time. A successful Ukraine will be a core element of our security here in Europe. It will require enormous investment to begin with, but eventually the rewards will be significant. The difference between post-World War II and today, in my opinion, is that we now need, as Europeans, need to recognize that the United States is not going to do it for us. It's not a political statement that I'm making. It's just a statement of fact. No matter who's in the White House, the United States is not going to do it for us. We're going to have to be the ones to craft the strategy, propose the policies, if necessary, create the institutions, spend the money, carry the bulk of the weight of the task, and then the reward will be ours as well. And hopefully, if we do all of the above, the United States will be there with us, supporting us with its enormous power. But it's going to be a European task. So what we're trying to do in our foreign policy today is what the Americans would say is, chew gum and walk at the same time. We're trying to help Ukraine survive. And by raising the cost of aggression on Russia, we're trying to push them to reassess their strategy. So we're trying to help bring this conflict to a just end. At the same time, we need to prepare for the peace to come. We can't just afford to focus on ending the war. We need to simultaneously focus on what kind of peace we want to emerge from this war. So this requires walking and chewing gum at the same time. Frankly, this is the hardest part for us Europeans. It's not the capabilities, it's not the money. It's that for 80 years, we've been out of the business of crafting strategy for ourselves. It's always been the US, or for Eastern Europe, we're under Moscow domination. It's always been an outside power for the past 80 years to define the parameters of what it is that we're discussing, create the institutions. I'm not saying that every European always agreed with what the United States proposed, but the United States did propose a coherent, strategy. And then Europeans were able to take positions either in support or in opposition of that. This is what's going to be different this time around in Ukraine's case. It's going to be up for the Europeans to define the strategy. And that's, I think, the most challenging part, because we have lost the language, we have lost the habit, and we need to now rapidly become strategic players again. I think we're moving in the right direction, but whether we're moving in the right direction fast enough is a question I'm afraid only history will answer.
Estonia's strategy may be in a little bit of a narrower sense. We've been talking about Ukraine, which makes sense, biggest war in Europe since World War II. And Putin does have his hands full now, it seems. But over the years, people have worried, could Putin try to attack a vulnerable Baltic country like Estonia? What is the strategy for deterring, and if deterrence fails, defeating a Russian invasion of Estonia?
The first element in that strategy is not to be the vulnerable state, not to be the weakest link in the chain. So that goes back to our earlier conversation on us spending 5% of defense, et cetera, et cetera. Us not being alone is not just a function of the treaties that we've signed and the organizations that we belong to. We have, since becoming NATO allies, we've worked hard to bring allies here. And today we have, as part of NATO policy, we have, for instance, in Estonia, British and French forces integrated into Estonian defense forces. We have allied aircraft conduct air policing operations over our skies, or in our skies over our lands. The point of which is to communicate to the other side that the idea of simply just attacking Estonia is not feasible, it's not doable. Not because of the political commitment or even the legally binding commitment that our allies have made, because we've determined, after years of careful analysis, that it's not our words that convince Putin. He focuses on our deeds. So it's not just the Article 5 commitment of allies to come to our assistance, but the very fact that allies are already here, integrated into our forces, and part of the defense arrangement that we have in place in peacetime. So that's the basic element of our strategy. But real life does not take place in a vacuum. There are constant developments on the margins, testing of waters, if you will, that may be accidental, but nevertheless inform the other side of the coherence of our posture, or the lack of coherence in our posture. So, for instance, last fall we had an incident where 3 Russian armed fighter jets violated our airspace. Those incidents have happened before, but this violence was different. It was more severe. They came in for a fairly long period of time. The situation was never out of control from a military perspective. NATO aircraft were shadowing them, but it's the context that matters. This violation took place mere days after similar incidents in Poland had prompted NATO to activate its Article 4 consultations for the 8th time in NATO history, and initiate an operation, Eastern Sentry, with the primary goal of deterring future similar Russian action. And yet, days later, there is similar Russian action in Estonia. So we were faced with the task of re-establishing deterrence. How did we do so? We went down the list of what potentially the Russian planners could have taken away from this situation as positives from their perspective. So if it is a demonstration of Estonia's airspace being less guarded, less defended by Allied reaction than, for instance, Polish airspace, then our task was to provide them the opposite result. If their goal was to have less Allied activity in our region, then our goal, in order to reestablish deterrence, was to provide them with the exact opposite, with more Allied presence, etc., etc. So on a daily basis, not out of a desire, not out of aggressiveness, but indeed out of a desire to constantly maintain a coherent deterrence posture. We adapt, we reassess, we communicate with additional new action, usually with one key element central to what we're trying to convey, which is that Estonia is not alone. Automatic allied reaction would be prompted by any violation of our sovereignty or territorial integrity, and Estonia will defend every square centimeter of her territory. So those two messages, again, part of our daily communication effort with the Russians. Currently, there is obviously no military danger whatsoever because, as you said, the Russians are all stuck in Ukraine. If that were to change, I would still assess the Estonian military situation to be safe, because I'm very confident in our ability to deter and defend. But we would much rather have Ukraine succeed and give us this added, how to put it, element, this added benefit of ensuring ourselves against the resurgence of Russian imperialism.
And we're almost out of time, but I want to squeeze in one final question. I'll ask you to be brief, and unfortunately, it's a big one. We've been focused on the security of Europe, but how does and Estonia? But how does Estonia's security matter to viewers in Washington D.C. or the United States, and into really, I guess, the West's global strategy? Should we care about Estonia's security?
So, if we zoom out and look at the challenges of the 21st century. We could go down the list. We don't have much time, but I think most would agree that the challenges are likely to grow and not diminish. And when you zoom into those challenges, then you would recognize that some of them have to do with alternative visions of how relations between individuals and relations between an individual and the state ought to be organized. So our democratic model of governance is no longer the only show in town. So if we are to succeed against those challenges, then you need to recognize that the combined might of the world's democracies, respectively speaking, is diminishing. We're either united or we're weaker. So I think Estonia separately, Estonia has great value for Estonia, obviously. For the United States, Estonia needs to be seen as part of Europe. Europe, whole, free, and at peace, aligned with the United States, is the greatest asset, in my opinion, that any country could have around the world, short of having the United States by one side. But the United States, is already on its side, presumably. So in the context of 21st century challenges, I think that consolidating democracies is not only ideologically, but pragmatically prudent. And that's why Estonia matters for the security of the United States.
Well, that's a good point on which to end, especially for a podcast from the Atlantic Council. We were founded in 1961 with the goal of promoting stronger transatlantic ties, and still trying to do that today, including through this conversation. So, Secretary General Vseviov, we know you're very busy. We appreciate you taking the time. So thank you very much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much.
Well, that was a fascinating conversation, and Secretary General Vseviov is always a compelling speaker. Viewers might be interested, why was I interested in focusing on Estonia's national security strategy? And it's because I do think it's an important part of global strategy, as the U.S. National Defense Strategy lays out very clearly. One of the biggest challenges we face now is the threat of simultaneity, multiple great power conflicts in Eurasia at the same time. And so for the United States to address that, an important part of the solution is burden sharing, having strong allies like Estonia, as represented by Secretary General Vseviov, stepping up and doing their part to provide security and deterrence in their part of the world. And I think we heard that very clearly in our episode today. This, of course, isn't a new idea for the Atlantic Council, founded in 1961 on the principle that a strong transatlantic relationship advances America's security in the world. This concludes our episode. Thank you very much for listening. Be sure to subscribe to So What's the Strategy wherever you get your podcasts, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.